Welcome back to another episode of Activista Rise Up. I am your host, Dr. Patricia Campos-Medina. You can listen to this show by following me on all my social media platforms. Activista Rise Up is about leadership, the leaders who take on issues and ask you to take action with them. By learning from them, we hope to inspire you to join the causes that you care about or to support their efforts or just get inspired to take action in your local community. Today, you will meet an amazing human being and a labor leader whom I have known for quite some time and whom I have a lot of respect for all that he does locally and nationally and globally. Jacob Horwitz is a labor organizer and a campaigner. He has built membership-based, worker-led organizing fights in the American South and in the Global South. For 15 years, he has led dozens of workplace and community campaigns against multinational corporations and has organized at the intersection of migration and forced labor. He is currently the field director at the Global Labor Justice, a transnational labor organization supporting collaboration among worker and migrant organizations to expand labor rights and win new forms of collective bargaining in the global supply chain. Jacob, welcome to Activista Rise Up.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here with everybody.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to have you. We have known each other for quite some time since we both joined the National Labor Leadership Institute, and we were both established leaders already, but trying to figure out how to make connections among each other. So I'm happy to have met you and have kept this relationship between the work that you are leading now at the Global Labor Justice organization and me, myself at the Worker Institute. So I'm just thrilled that we can have this discussion and be able to share with my followers and at Activista Rise Up a little bit about the Global Labor Justice Project. So why don't you tell me and tell our listeners a little bit about you and about the Global Labor Justice Organization?
For sure. Well, thank you for that generous introduction, and great to be here with everybody. So Global Labor Justice International Labor Rights Forum is, as you said, a transnational labor rights organization. And the way we work, we form deep relationships with union partners in different parts of the world. And then together we co-develop campaigns on multinational corporations, particularly campaigns on corporations that have major US supply chains or that are themselves US corporations. We work especially in the garment sector, in agriculture, in hospitality, and also in seafood. And as an organization, we really see our role as both delivering power to global campaigns and to workers in different parts of the world, and also working to facilitate and establish deep connections between rank and file leaders in the Global South, as well as union leaders here in the US who might have a common interest against a similar corporation or a common interest in the sector, or even against an investor that affects everybody. Some of our deepest partners include the Asia Floor Wage Alliance, which is a coalition of over 20 unions across 7 countries in Asia. We also work deeply with unions in Honduras and Guatemala, as well as in South America. We're working with an emerging union in Uzbekistan, and we also have a partnership with the IUF. So that is a little bit about who we are and what our work is. And we've got lots of campaigns across those sectors kind of going at all times.
To me, it's hearing you talk about, all the campaigns that you are playing in all the regions of the world that you're playing. It makes me think of the importance of global solidarity and of supporting the role that we have in America as the biggest consumer market in supporting labor rights and the fight of workers all over the world. So I know that to someone who's just listening and saying, how do you win when you are all over, in global campaigns and against global corporations? But you recently were very instrumental in one major campaign that I know about, which is the Justice for Gesture campaign. and with the Tamil Nadu textile, and I might be messing up the name, but it's that when which you gain a major agreement to eliminate gender-based violence and harassment in the textile industry. So why don't you share a little bit about that victory? Because to me, that's exemplifies how we can make a difference in entire industries when we actually use our consumer power.
Absolutely. Yeah. So as you said, I feel honored to have been part of the fight that delivered what is called the Dindigul Agreement to Eliminate Gender-Based Violence. This is a set of interlocking agreements between a local trade union, the Tamil Nadu Textile and Common Laborers Union, TTCU, and a major garment supplier called Eastman Exports, which is the fourth largest garment producer in India.
Wow.
That agreement between the union and the supplier is supported by a set of interlocking agreements with multinational fashion brands that we help to win, and that we're also signatories to. And that includes Gap, H&M, and PVH. And so, what this agreement essentially does is it delivers power and protections to women workers and the union on the ground in Tamil Nadu to both identify and remediate gender-based violence. Workers the union has been given full access to the factories that are covered under the agreement. And a group of shop floor monitors, which are sort of like shop stewards, have been empowered to address gender-based violence in the factory. And that's one shop steward or shop floor monitor per 25 workers in a set of factories of about 5,000. So it's a huge amount of protections. Those worker leaders are also given extra anti-retaliation protections so that they can bring the grievances of the workers on their line direct to management, confront them, and attempt to remediate it. And we've just seen, so it's a little less than a year old, and we've just seen amazing progress. And we're going to release a report in the coming month, kind of detailing that. So stay tuned. But this victory comes from a global campaign where in the aftermath of a horrific incident where a young woman, Jayshree Katrivel, who was a member of TTCU and also a student, only 21 years old, was actually murdered by her supervisor after facing months of sexual harassment from him. And so kind of in the legacy of Jayshree, we all came together and lifted up her case and lifted up this story. And we held a massive global vigil. We held a massive speaking tour including stops in New York and other parts of the US, which eventually resulted in the negotiation and signing of this set of agreements. So, I think I can get into it more if it's helpful, but we're very proud to have been able to help that happen and excited about what it's opened up in terms of unions building power and building an end to gender-based violence in a sector where it is so endemic and so problematic.
I want to elevate about 3 points that you made that I think for anybody who wants to enter social movement organizer or want to enter campaigning needs to, perhaps is interested in figuring out is how do you get an international corporation like the Gap or H&M to actually care about what happened to a worker in a major big factory. The supply chain is so large, right? That there's some brands that will say, well, we have nothing to do with that because we just contract it out. You also want to elevate that you say you're talking with the unions there. So how do you go about creating awareness of the American consumer about what's happening overseas, and then creating the power to actually demand that the Gap and the major corporations actually take action? Because we need to do that more, right, as American consumers. So maybe just a little bit like if there is a possibility to do a strategic campaign 101, how did you go about getting the gap and then to actually say, let's put an agreement together to end gender violence in the apparel industry for this region?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really starts with the nature of the partnership that we have with the Asia Floor Wage Alliance, which TTCU is a member of. And so we have an organizational structure that I think global labor justice was built to create. We know that corporations and capital is global, and in order to really meet that as a labor movement, we also have to be able to organize globally, but also with really deep and strong roots at the local and regional level. Otherwise, we're not meeting the realities of what's happening on the ground. So, I mean, I think unfortunately, the conditions in the factories at Nachi, where this occurred, are not unique. It's far too common that gender-based violence and even murders are occurring all the time. Factories are set up often in areas, in rural areas. The majority of the workers in that factory are either migrant workers or workers from oppressed castes, and the employers leverage that to push workers to work extremely hard at extremely low wages. But workers also are organizing and pushing back. And so we were able to do this in part because TTCU was there on the ground the minute this happened, and part of a regional global network of other unions that were connected also to us. So from the moment that this occurred, we were able to lift it up at a global level. We got a story placed in The Guardian, and then we quickly launched a global sign-on letter that was signed by over 90 trade unions across the world to the brands that were sourcing from the factory. And, I think from there, we started to get their attention.
Yeah.
And we had to keep building the attention on the campaign while also being in a process of dialogue and negotiation and not burning that. And so, we partly did that through the speaking tour, which really lifted up and centered Jayashree's life and TTCU as a union. And we worked hard to connect with other parts of the supply chain. So when we did a speaking tour stop in Chicago, we had the warehouse workers present for that stop. And these are workers who actually move H&M products. And we don't know if they were reboxing clothing from the factory where TTCU was organizing, but they may well could have. And so, that kind of whole supply chain strategy is something that we've been building up. And, we knew that if we needed to, we could have turned the speaking tour stops into actions at stores. So part of it was we had to build the US field that was ready to take action on the brands if it was necessary. But in the interim, we were just keeping the attention going. And I think that's part of it. And, again, I think I said this before, but we really believe in the value of developing the relationships between US labor movement and rank and file leaders and leaders in the labor movement that we're partnering with in different parts of the globe. And I think it's through that alliance that real power can be built. It kind of goes beyond the usual suspects who might be in solidarity, who are critical and important as well.
Yeah.
But I think it really opens up possibilities for the kind of pressure that it takes to win.
Yeah, and it's important to just elevate a couple of things that you said, which is the solidarity among unions in the United States and globally, and the difference that it makes in creating that connections. And I think your organizations plays that bridging role of bringing the stories and bringing the strategy too, because there's a lot of unions who care about supporting but don't have a real assessment of what the things are in the ground. So that global labor justice playing that role is critical. And also it talks to me about the importance of consumer action, right? About when we as consumers who like, now apparel is made all over the world, right? So we don't really, we have to demand that apparel brands all over the world have some minimum standards. So as consumers, when we are asked to take action, how much power that has to help you do that work. One thing you said is that there's a lot of, this campaign is only one, right? The apparel industry is huge. Do you feel like you're making a difference by leading these campaigns?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know that I can speak to the whole world, but what I will say is I do believe that the victory that we were a part of and have had in Tamil Nadu, India, is a model, and I think it does. I think it does point to a lot of hope. I think we have a long way to go, and for example, we know for garment workers around the world, and particularly garment workers in Asia, who we're working most closely with. Um, people are living in day-to-day crisis, and one of our current campaigns that, again, we're doing in partnership with the Asia Floor Wage Alliance and 20 unions from 6 different countries across Asia, is lifting up that crisis for workers. We launched a campaign last month called Fight the Heist, which essentially is working to try and hold brands accountable for the massive wage loss and wage theft that workers experienced during the pandemic. And we know that, when the pandemic struck, big garment brands like Nike, like Levi's, and so many others basically cut orders, refused to pay for orders, or reduced their orders dramatically. And suppliers that already operate on super razor thin profit margins basically passed that crisis on to workers and conducted mass layoffs, or simply didn't pay workers for work they had done, or didn't pay overtime. We have the story of one member who, when she raised issues with her check, they actually locked her in a room until she signed her resignation letter, which prevented her from getting any kind of severance payment. And so those are the kind of things that were happening in the pandemic. Asia Floor Wage Alliance did a massive survey of over 2,000 workers and found that on average, garment workers lost about 3 months worth of wages during the early year of the pandemic. And garment brands actually, during that essentially same period of time, made record profits. And Nike, for example, actually increased their share buybacks to $18 billion over the period of the pandemic. So they were making massive profits. They were taking those profits and just putting it directly in the pockets of shareholders. And meanwhile, workers were continuing to suffer and barely having enough to live and survive. And we've recently gone back to several of those factories and talked to the unions that operate there, and found that at least 90% of the workers that the unions are talking to still haven't recovered from the losses during the pandemic. So the campaign Fight the Heist is a fight to get workers paid back, and to say that garment brands need to stop their share buybacks, stop dumping money into their shareholders until they've paid every worker and made them whole. So I think that, what we know is that workers are still in deep crisis, but that also around the world, workers are coming together more and organizing and demanding justice and demanding dignity and living wages. And so we're extremely hopeful and excited about the alliances that have been possible and that we continue to try and build here in the US to make that possible. On that campaign, for example, workers are linking up with some of the US workers that are also calling out corporations for practices like stock buybacks, and linking arms across borders with them, so that railroad workers and airline workers are also relating to garment workers in this way, and really standing in solidarity with each other in a mutual fight against Wall Street. So I think all that gives us hope. Of course, our work is never done, but I think we are seeing we are seeing increasing organization. We're seeing growth of those alliances and partnerships. And I think that is hopeful.
What makes me hopeful about what you just shared is actually the fact that there is a common understanding of who the who is benefiting, who the enemy is, and it's corporate greed, right? Because whether it be workers in the United States who were laid off or were working without any protections, or workers globally who were, whose job wages were stolen, it's the same corporations, right? Whether it's in the United States or globally, the same corporation who are still making money and giving it back on dividends to the stockholders. So I like that, gives me hope that there's a common understanding of who we're fighting. It is corporate greed. So I want to just call on my listeners to pay attention to the campaigns that are being played, and when we ask you to take action on a campaign, and Nike has been here before. It's not the first time that Nike has to respond. And we as consumers have forced them to respond, just like we're trying to make a Starbucks respond to their corporate responsibility. So it seems like there's more of a common language globally, and there's more willingness to come together. So I am excited that you are leading this work. But how do you get to? I mean, I know you began as an organizer in the U.S., in the American South, working with migrants and forced labor. But how do you get into that work, and how did you make the leap into doing global campaigns?
Sure. Well, I mean, my great grandfather was actually an immigrant and a garment worker in New York, and he got involved in the Ladies Garment Workers Union, which later became Unite. And so I feel like I've always come from a union family. I grew up in California, and after college, went to work with Unite here, Local 2. And, I think I learned a lot about how you can run strategic corporate campaigns. We were working on a boycott of Marriott at that time. But, in 2006, Hurricane Katrina happened, and, the massive, massive displacement of Black New Orleanians combined with the kind of deep labor exploitation of immigrant workers who came to work on the reconstruction kind of spurred a massive social movement response. And there was a friend of mine in New Orleans at the time who invited me to come and just support as a volunteer at a worker center that was just starting up. So I came to New Orleans as a volunteer interpreter to support kind of Black workers and immigrant workers who were fighting against the dynamics of displacement and exploitation, access to jobs. And, the conditions were incredibly raw and stark. And you had, you had workers who were rebuilding massive areas of New Orleans, and then their employers calling ICE on them at the end of the day instead of giving them a paycheck. You had Black workers that had been pushed out into FEMA trailer parks very far from the city and had services sort of systematically cut off from them, while housing was being bulldozed, public housing was locked. And so, I thought I would be here maybe for a month, but now 17 years later, I'm still in New Orleans. And, I think in as that worker center grew and developed, I started working more and more on supporting a group of immigrant guest workers, workers on temporary work visas, who come to the United States in debt, live in labor camps, and are kind of put to work across the South and across the country generally in low wage industries. And I think through the campaigns that I supported with that group of workers, we always felt and knew that we had to work internationally. Part of the workers' stories was what had happened to them back home, be that in Mexico or India or the Philippines, and kind of the recruitment process. And early on in our work, we started accompanying workers back home. We worked closely with an organization called Prodesk in Mexico to help establish a project in a town in Sinaloa, Mexico, where many, many workers come to Louisiana. And so I think through that kind of transnational work, we began to develop strategies and analysis about how to work binationally. And some of the workers in that fight, in a Walmart supplier, for example, were seafood processors from Mexico. And we were able to kind of take that campaign global and organize actions in Mexico alongside what the workers were doing here in the US to hold Walmart accountable for the conditions on their supply chain. And so I think all of those experiences kind of informed this global lens. And so, it's been 3 years now. I came to Global Labor Justice to work kind of more specifically and explicitly on the kind of international work. Although I really think all of our labor movement work is international and needs to be international. But at GLJ, it's kind of our job to help facilitate that and make it happen and deliver support and power to it. So,
well, I'm excited you're doing that work, and I like the progression of your story, because you said you came to New Orleans to support a crisis, a moment of deep crisis for Black workers and poor workers in New Orleans, and that led you to making the connections between temporary workers, migrant workers, sometimes some forced labor, and then now going and doing this binational connections between workers. So that progression, I think it is important, because we also have forced labor and really exploitation in some of the U.S. Workplaces that are connected to migrant and temporary workers. So you are absolutely right. Our labor movement needs to be binational and needs to be global. So I'm excited that you are part of making those connections and engaging both unions on both sides. Besides the Fight the Heights campaign, and I'm going to have information about the Fight the Heights campaign so that you all can support it. What are other campaigns that Global Labor Justice is working on? And I know you have a specific campaign in Honduras, which is trying to address some of the reasons of the migrant crisis from Central America. So let's talk a little bit about that, and then just share the campaigns that you're working on and you would like our listeners at Activista Rise Up to support.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have been working in support of an independent farm worker union called STAS, el Sindicato de Trabajadores Agrícolas y Similares, in Honduras. That union has been organizing at a company called Fifes, which is actually I think they're the fourth largest banana grower producer for Europe, and for the US, they produce melons. And so it's just been a brutal and long fight. Workers began to organize, it's almost 10 years ago. And the company's response was just to try and break the union again and again. Members of the initially elected steering committee for the union faced violent attacks. Workers were discriminated against and kind of forced out of the industry. And still, workers have stayed steadfast and strong and, really fighting to be able to sign a collective bargaining agreement so that they can have fair wages, health and safety, payments into the Social Security system, which is kind of like the benefit system, both for healthcare as well as for retirement. And we've been working deeply with them. And on March 29th of this year, we supported, and I was actually there on the ground with workers when they did a massive mobilization. Over 500 workers marched on the company gates and then marched through Choluteca, which is in the south of Honduras. And, they delivered a petition to the company calling on the company to sign an agreement with them and negotiate a collective bargaining agreement. And, I think, again, the melons that workers are planting, harvesting, and packing are all being sold in the United States. And so as the campaign kind of enters another active phase, we are going to be organizing actions. We're going to be talking to retailers. We will be also in Europe, putting pressure on the company from there. And, I think it's this kind of global action that is necessary to win. And so it will be important for listeners to stay tuned and kind of figure out how you can support in putting pressure on FIFEs and putting pressure on some of the retailers that purchase their products to push them to actually sign with this union. The majority of the workers in those fields are women, and many of them walk as far as an hour and a half every day to get to the farm. And they're just kind of very steadfast and inspiring leaders. And we have some videos of some of the workers who came together ahead of the protest that you can watch and hear on our website, which is globallaborjustice.org. But that's the FIFE's campaign, and one of the big fights. I think just going back quickly to the fight with Nike and the Fight the Heist campaign, workers, the unions and we launched that fight. We released a report on how the companies were putting money into the shareholders' pockets rather than paying back workers for the stolen wages. And we also filed what's called an OECD complaint, which is kind of an international labor rights complaint. We're now moving into a more active phase of putting pressure on Nike. And so folks should stay tuned. We will be doing actions in key cities coming up, and we'll be excited to invite you all to participate and to elevate on social media. But, garment workers are kind of coming for Wall Street, and we're excited to be standing with them and invite you all to stand with them as well.
That makes me think about, what would you say to a college student or a high school student who says, "But I like Nike. Why should I? I'm just one person, and why would me taking action matter to Nike?" What would you say to that teenager or a college student that perhaps doesn't want to start wearing the latest trends to join you and join this campaign?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's why we're not calling on you to act as one individual person, but as people organized. And I think it's the collective voice of workers and consumers and others across our society that is going to have an impact. And, we know Nike wants to market themselves as some kind of company that is all about equality and justice and supports like all of our causes, and we know that that's not true. And so we need young people to come together and join with garment workers, many of whom are also teenagers and who are also extremely young, and take action. And that has been shown to win against Nike in the past. It was really university students who, again, not acting as individuals but acting collectively, were able to move Nike to sign agreements to pay workers back. And we can do that again, and we will.
Yeah. And that's the message of Activista Rise Up, that if we all take action together and we all join the causes that we care about, or that leaders like you are organizing around, that we can actually push corporate America to actually live up to its corporate responsibility. So thank you for doing all the work that you do to bring global solidarity to bear. We will be sharing the campaigns that you mentioned, and we will be calling all of you to join with Global Labor Justice. Visit their website and sign up so you can get all their alerts and join in taking action together to actually respond to social responsibility and corporate responsibility. Thank you, Jacob, for joining us. And please count on Activista Rise Up and myself as a supporter and promoter of all the campaigns that you're doing, supporting workers actually globally in the United States to demand better from their employers. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much, Patricia. And thank you as always for all of your deep collaboration and care, and really appreciate our partnership and work together, and appreciate you in particular. So thank you.
Thank you, Jacob.
Right.
You heard it. It's about taking collective action. You and many more together, demanding that corporate America does better, that uses its profits to invest back in good wages and good working conditions and respect the workers to organize. That's how we create change. That's how we create powerful working people nationally and globally. Join us. Join the Global Labor Alliance in their campaigns, supporting workers in apparel and in the farm industry to demand better from their employers. Take action, support workers in the United States, and together we will create economic progress and economic equity for workers. Join us, Activista Rise Up.